Hello, everyone. I'm Jeremy Stuart, joined here by Scott Noelle. Hey, Scott, how are you?
I am just fantastic. No, I'm just fine. No, wait. I'm checking in. How am I? Oh, it's such a hard question to answer.
I'm assuming he's just fine.
I'm fine. I'm
Yeah,
fine. But yeah, I think I'm always a lot of things, and I always have a hard time with that question.
it's a difficult question. It was a trick one, and I purposely threw it at you to trip
All
you
right.
up.
Next time,
But
remind me, just ask me, Scott, are you fine?
yeah,
And I'll say
I'll
yes.
do a little checklist, and you can just point. Anyway, we are here again to bring you another installment of our book discussion podcast on Charles Eisenstein's The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. Here's the wonderful book. So
Does it come with a pencil?
it comes with a pen and everything, so you can take notes.
Nice.
So thanks for joining us if you're listening in, and let's jump right into this week's chapters. So we're going to be talking about six chapters today. I'll just quickly give you the titles for those. The first one is Morphogenesis,
Ooh.
Naivete, Reality, Spirit, Orthodoxy, and Newness. So those are the chapters that we're going to be talking about today. And Scott, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, one of the things that struck me the most about this particular group of chapters is that I felt like I was tuning into um, a struggle that Charles goes through, that I also myself go through, which is this kind of struggle between uh, wanting to believe in that which is beyond scientific proof, but also wanting to be accepted and taken seriously by people who only take scientific thinking seriously.
Hmm.
I'm not going to assign anything to him, although it does seem implicit in the kind of refutation that goes on in these chapters. He's frequently sort of kind of almost, I want to say, almost defending the position of, the positions that are necessary in order to accept interbeing, this new
Hmm.
story. You have to accept certain positions that have been rejected by the old story.
Right.
And but I kind of it's like I feel your pain, Charles, when I read, and it reminds me of the times where I've felt this struggle to sort of straddle both worlds and to be taken seriously on both sides. It's hard
Right.
to do.
Yeah. And it strikes me too that in reading this that it probably took an enormous act of courage for Charles to put these thoughts down into this book and put it out there in the way that he's done, because, as you said, it straddles both worlds. It dips. I like the way he dips into the old story and into the new story and straddles both those things. And I love the fact that he's able to kind of hold the container for both of them and sort of walk through navigating back and forth between those. And as you said, often people are just going to be on one side or the other side. It's and dismiss one side as being you know too new agey or whatever, or unscientific, or the other side to be too rigid and too stuck. And yet somehow Charles manages to hold all of it.
Yeah.
So an enormous act of courage, I think, to put that out there and to stand in that place. So yeah.
And then he goes so far as to admit that he believes in Santa Claus. He
Yeah,
says,
I
"There, I
like
said it."
I
I
like the
thought that was hilarious, and actually reminded me of conversations that I'd had where I'd actually stopped to think about, do I believe in Santa Claus? Because that's a topic that always comes up in parenting forums.
uh-huh.
When people say, "Well, should I pretend that Santa Claus is real? For the benefit of my kid to have that magical experience?"
Uh-huh.
And I always said, well, the way I resolved that conundrum was just to decide that Santa Claus is real. And I think one of the things that that comes about from this way of thinking and straddling both worlds is you start to see the possibilities where it can be both and instead of either or. You know,
Right.
it can be both, that Santa Claus is real and not real in certain ways. So to
Right.
me, Santa Claus is real in a kind of in the sense of there's a consciousness out there. You know, there's a field of Santa Clausness that exists, and I think it's real. I think it's real. We invoke those kinds of things whenever we tell stories, and whether there's an actual spiritual being that at one time was Saint Nicholas and now is, you know, doing things or living in the North Pole or whatever, I don't really care.
Well, I will tell you, Scott, I don't mean to burst your bubble, but the tooth fairy is not real.
Oh, that just, yeah.
I just killed it for you right there.
Yeah,
No, I
and
mean,
I'm thinking of all the money I spent, you know, trying to appease her.
yeah, really. Well, money, think of the money I've spent as the tooth fairy. You know, it gets expensive when teeth fall out these days with inflation and everything. But so I mean that's one of the wonderful things I like about this book is there's an all-inclusiveness to it, and he really seems to go to great lengths to do that, to hold both opposing sides. And you know, I like the way you said it just then. It's not an either or. It's an you know and what was it you said? And
Both and, yes.
both and right, which I really like. And in fact, the way and we talked about this a little bit last time. The way he lays the chapters out very much alike that. It's like he'll set out one thing that you think for sure, okay, this is really living in the world of interbeing. This whole chapter is about that. And then the very next chapter is completely the opposite almost. It's like he puts you right back into the story of the world as we currently know it. And yet, and you're like, wait, we were already here and now we're going back here again, but they're both there.
Yeah.
And he draws parallels and connects the dots for us. And I think that's just really remarkable. So,
Right. And it sort of alludes to the idea that we live in a time where you can't rest on your laurels. You know, you can't, I mean, if you're really going to move or take this journey from the old to the new story, you can't just say, "Oh, there's a new story and that's it. I got
right.
it." You know, you're always going to be straddling it to some extent.
Yeah, I think there always has to be that sort of essence of beginner's mind, you know, being open to
Mm.
possibility and being open to questioning and refuting yourself, even. You know, when you think you get something, oh, yeah, I totally get that now. Oh, that's totally understood. You know, if you start going down that road, then you're already sort of backpedaling into the old story again.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to stay open to realizing that, yeah, we don't know, and we kind of never know, and we're always knowing, and we're always moving toward knowingness. But to have that openness to hold both sides and to be willing to switch back and forth effortlessly when it's necessary is really, really powerful stuff. So, you know, it's funny, this first chapter, Morphogenesis, he talks about, you know, one of the ideas in there is that no act is too small of an act to change the world. And you know, the little ideas are just as important as the big ones. And when you were speaking about Santa Claus, I started thinking about Dr. Seuss. There's that great book about, I'm trying to think of the line, there's a person is a person no matter how small. Do you remember that
That's
book?
from the Who's. Yeah, that's from
Yeah.
Horton Hears a Who. Yeah.
Horton Hears a Who, yeah. And I was kind of reminded of that when I read this chapter, the idea that, you know, no matter how tiny a dent you think you're making or how irrelevant you might think that is in the big picture, it's just as important as people who are making, you know, massive, great changes and like, you know, writing a book or making a movie or whatever it is, you know, or leading a huge movement of people. All of that is important. All of it's relevant. And that's what he keeps coming back to in that first chapter, you know. And I love the idea of the morphic resonance that he talks about.
Right.
That even those tiniest acts create ripples that then spread out and affect those around you. And
When I saw that he was quoting Rupert Sheldrake,
mhm.
I got chills and got all excited because at the time that I read Charles's book, I had been also really enthusiastically following Rupert Sheldrake and this idea of not just morphic resonance, but the whole idea of a transformation in scientific thinking. And so his book is one that I'll recommend. I'll post a link to some of his stuff. I think, yeah, he's got a bunch of great videos that you can watch. But
yeah, I don't know about him, so that would be interesting.
It's fascinating. His latest book is in the UK. It's called The Science Delusion, and it's basically it's a refutation of a popular book called The God Delusion, which the famous scientist that wrote it is escaping me right now, his name. But anyway, so it's basically really talking about many of the same things that Charles is talking about. In the U.S., the title of the book is called Science Set Free. And he's talking about freeing science from the kind of fundamentalist scientific thinking and orthodoxy that has prevented people from thinking beyond scientific materialism. I'm gonna encapsulate what you said with a quote.
Yeah.
From the book, Charles writes, "The universe calls forth different of our gifts at different moments. When the call is for the small and personal, let us heed that, so that we develop the habit of heeding it when it is big and public."
Huh. Yeah, that's great.
I thought that was interesting. Also, in light of the fact that, we're not getting a ton of views on these videos initially, but you never know when they're going to go viral.
Watch, this one's going to get 1.5 million.
Anyway, but I was thinking, if we were having a book discussion in person, we would maybe get together in a living room with 5 or 6 people and talk about these things. So right. I know we're getting more than 5 or 6 views. So I feel good about it. Even in the old story, I feel good about making these videos.
Even in the old story. That's great. I'm just thinking there's something I underlined here. So, I mean, Charles goes even further than that, though, in saying that, even if no one ever learns of it, even if it's invisible to every human on Earth, right? Your personal project or your social intervention or whatever it is will still have the same effect,
right? Because
of this morphic resonance idea. So that's pretty powerful, because sometimes I think we feel like often we're working in isolation or we're in a bubble. And in fact, jumping ahead into one of the other chapters, one thing that came up to me, this idea that what difference am I making in doing this? Like, so let me just look at my notes here. I'm trying to think. There was a moment here. Oh yeah. So in the spirit chapter, this is what struck me about that chapter. And I liked how he says spirituality can be used as a kind of escapism, which I thought was interesting. So, one thing personally that I've always dealt with, I mean, I've as someone who's lived in two different spiritual communities, and spent a lot of time in meditation centers and practicing meditation practices of different kinds. One question that often came up to me is, well, what difference am I making to the world just by sitting here on this cushion and meditating in this lovely, retreat in the woods somewhere, that's kind of removed from the world in a sense? What difference am I really making? And that always really plagued me and bothered me. And it was always hard to come to terms with the idea that, yes, even that is making a big difference. And Charles kind of speaks to that directly in these chapters. Even if no one even knows that you're doing that, and you're sitting there and you're sitting with the intention of making a difference, that it's actually doing that. Right. And beyond that, of course, he talks about the fact that you have to make a difference in yourself in order to make a difference anywhere else. Like, if you're not in alignment with yourself, if you're not in tune with yourself, then no amount of activism, no amount of work or effort outside of yourself is really going to make that much difference, because you're not in tune with that greater purpose in your own being.
Yeah.
So I think we have to start here. There's no other place to start, you know.
Well,
Wherever you
and
go.
getting back to what you're saying about meditating and whether it makes a difference, reminds me of some things. There's a guy, Dean Radin, who has done a lot of. He's a scientist who focuses on parapsychology, and and tries to design experiments that are that give some scientific validity to paranormal things that are normally considered either unreal or pseudoscientific. And and they've done studies where they have like a group of advanced meditators all meditating at the same time, and then they find some statistical reduction in crime during that same time, or I
Right,
don't know the
right.
exact details, but it was actually statistically significant
Hmm.
that that it did make a difference. It's just that nobody would ever put those things together because it's not obvious.
Right, right. Yeah, I've seen similar studies too and examples of that happening. So yeah, it's a very powerful thing. I mean, if you think about it just from a purely sort of energetic standpoint, if we're all just really made up of energy and we're part of the sort of cosmic energy around us, then changing our own energy is going to affect the energy around us and clearly radiate out beyond our own sphere. So it has to make some difference. But it's an interesting question, when you spend a lot of time kind of cloistered away in the woods somewhere, sitting on a cushion meditating. There's, as he says, like there's this sort of a spiritual escapism that can kind of come in that you feel like, well, what is it? What this is all good and everything, but what is it really doing? Should I be out there, in the picket lines instead, or should I be, riding in the streets, or something?
Yeah.
You know, there's sort of a passiveness sometimes that comes in that feels like it's because there's no direct action. It feels like it's not making any
Right.
difference.
And we need to start reframing that as, even though there's no direct or visible action, doesn't mean there's no invisible action.
Right.
And especially if this idea of morphic fields is really the way things are, it's difficult to prove, but I mean, it can't be proven scientifically. But if that is the way things are, then it makes sense that the person sitting and meditating is changing the structure of energy, of space and time is changing, depending on what anyone is thinking or doing at any time. And if you're sitting and generating a pure field of thought or a pure field of love, that's radiating out into the world and having an effect that nobody can really see.
Right.
But collectively, we do feel those things. I feel like we kind of skipped over. I'm thinking about people who might be watching and haven't read the book or don't really know much about this idea of morphic fields. But just to put it in a nutshell, this idea of morphic resonance is the idea that there exists some kind of uh, field phenomenon in which when anything happens, it's more likely to keep happening. It's like the universe has habits. And so the example that often is used is this idea of the crystals, that certain crystals are hard to form in a laboratory, but once they've been formed a few times, they're they're easy to form after that. Or a lot of it is more explained in terms of psychology, like the idea of the 4-minute mile, was something that everyone believed was impossible and
Hmm.
nobody could do it. But as soon as one person did it,
Yeah.
then suddenly everybody, a lot of people were doing it. So, so some of them can be explained in material terms, but overall, it's this idea that there's a field, whether it's just thoughts moving around, transmitted from one mind to another, or something more ethereal, something more like like I was saying, some sort of field that we don't have the kind of instruments that can detect them, but we can infer them from certain kinds of experimentation. Anyway, that's what Rupert Sheldrake, in a very very limited overview of the kind of things that he talks about. But check him out if that interests you. That dear viewers, if that interests you, check it out. I'll post some links to some of his videos. He's a remarkable, intelligent guy, brilliant guy.
Cool.
Before we go on, though, I think we had some poetry related to morphogenesis, did we not?
I believe we might have done. Let's see. Yes, I think you have something there.
I have one from Brooke, a haiku about morphogenesis. She writes, "We can change the world in a million different ways, one act at a time."
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up right there. One act at a time, no matter how big or small.
And then we have a new poet added to our cabal of poets here. One of them is, or the new one is Barb Lundgren, who I should say is the founder of the Rethinking Everything conference. And she will also be at the conference this year. So I'm looking forward to seeing her again. And she got all inspired and wrote quite a lot of poetry. We won't have time to read it all here, but we picked some choice morsels. And I'm going to read one here that is a limerick related to morphogenesis and the idea of what's possible. So this is Barb Lundgren. "I woke with a pain in my ass, the effects of yesterday's mass. The dogma was deep, the guilt far too steep. It was all so impossibly crass."
That's great. That's great. She also wrote another one specific to the rethink. I think she's referring to Rethinking Everything in this. As you said, she was the founder of it, and under the chapter heading of naivete, which I think is wonderful, because obviously she created something amazing out of just a simple idea, and it takes a huge amount of naivete to put your foot forward and bring something like that into being. And now it's what, 19 years strong, that the Rethinking Everything?
Yeah, I think you may be right. We're coming up on 20.
Right. So she wrote this. "I dreamt of creating an event of like-minded folks in a tent. I didn't know how to put on the powwow, but in the end, all the folks went." She's pretty good at limericks.
I think so. Although the rest of what she wrote was haiku, so we'll share some more of her haikus later on.
Yeah. So since she sort of was talking there about that sort of naivete, maybe we should speak a little bit about that being the next chapter in this series that we're talking about.
Yes. Let me open this with a quote from the beginning of chapter 12. This is Charles Eisenstein. "To be naive is to trust in the goodness of others when there is scant evidence of it, or to trust something might happen when you don't know how it could. Naivete is a curse when it obfuscates practical actions, but I'm talking about a situation where the practical is insufficient." And I love that, because he's kind of saying to all the sort of the naysayers, well, you can continue to be skeptical and believe that there's nothing we can do, but you might as well believe, if we're just going to go down, you might as well just give it a try. Give naivete a try.
Right. Well, it's that idea that, regardless of what anybody thinks, I'm just going to do it anyway, because, I believe I'm called to do it, or I believe in doing it. And so regardless of what anyone says, just do it. And you never know what's going to happen, right? Either you're going to fail or you're going to succeed. But the point is just to have that, that trusting spirit, that plunge right in and see what you can get out of it.
Right.
And trust is obviously a huge part of that. I think trust comes hand in hand with that naivete, just trusting the universe is going to sort of support you in that. Mm-hmm. And he talks a lot about that in these various chapters, about the idea that if you're really committed and willing to put yourself into something, then remarkable results come back. But if you're even slightly questioning your own ambition, your own trust is not fully formed,
Mm-hmm.
then you're going to get mediocre results back.
Well, I'd be curious how you would reflect on that idea in light of your recent project of creating a documentary, a really awesome, excellent documentary, Class Dismissed. What, what, I mean, would you say that when you started it, you were naive?
Completely naive. Yeah. I mean, it literally started out of a conversation. And a friend, Roy Robles, and mine, a friend of mine, Roy Robles, and I were talking at a conference, and we just started talking about, hey, how come there's no movies about this, homeschooling or unschooling? Like, well, why has no one made a movie? And we started to talk about it, and then right there and then we both looked at each other and just said, yeah, someone needs to make a movie about this. Let's do it. And it was just totally like almost childlike, completely ridiculous, you
Right.
know? And then we went away and I started doing research and realizing, that, yeah, there wasn't anything out there like this. No one had ever really made a film like this. I mean, there were smaller attempts at it, but there were other things on YouTube and so on, but certainly not to the degree that I was envisioning it. And
And so you had worked on some really high quality projects. You kind of had a higher bar to begin with.
yeah,
And you didn't want to just throw together like this. What you and I are doing is a casual YouTube kind of thing, but you really wanted to create something worthy of or that would be. Listen to me. I'm so in the old story. I'm questioning the way I'm talking about this, but nevertheless, it did.
yeah.
I mean, you wanted it to be something that would be seen by people in the old story as legitimate.
Right, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it definitely had pretty high expectations. I'm my own worst critic, so it had to meet my approval first, and that's a tough one. But no, but it took a huge amount of naivete to jump in and do it. And then the further I got into the project, the more and more overwhelmed I became. I mean, when I realized, at one point I was like, what have I done? And Roy got busy and had to do other things, and so I was basically on my own until I met my co-producer Dustin, who came aboard to help me finish it out. But at one point I was ready to just throw in the towel. It was like 2.5 years into it, and I'm like, this is insane. What have I done?
I'm guessing that in your naive beginnings, you thought, oh, this will take a few months.
Yeah. I figured, we'll be able to knock this out pretty quick. And then I realized, no, I'm in for the long haul. And ultimately it took 4.5 years.
Wow.
So, but it's interesting too, because in a way, that sort of naivete and that willingness to just trust that everything would work out was the only way to really get through the project. And, and Charles talks about this a little bit in these chapters too, about, when you sort of step out of the way, in a sense, when your ego kind of steps out of the way, and you just trust that something's going to show up here to make this work, and you really believe in that, and then all of a sudden something shows up to make it work, and it's exactly what you needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I just absolutely love those moments when they happen, and there were many of them in the making of this film. There were so many moments like that
Right.
that were just absolutely, beyond anything I could have conjured up.
Right. Well, and in particular, what blew me away is that you found a family because you had decided you had enough resources to follow one family for a year and, and follow their journey into homeschooling. And the family you found was like, it was so perfect, like in terms of just sort of representative of so many aspects of the typical person who is in that situation. And they even were fairly close to you. I mean, they could have been on the other side of the country, but they were just a drive away.
Exactly. I mean, that's one example. It was just, perfect. I put the call out there and thought, well, no one's going to really respond to this. This is going to be really hard. And I got like 150 families respond from all over the place. And as I started reading through them, I realized, yes, look at this. This is happening. Like this could manifest. Something could actually come out of this. So yeah, and there were a lot of moments like that. But So for me, it was just a lot of letting go and trusting that somehow or other I was going to get to the end of it. I mean, and even just from a purely practical standpoint, like having absolutely no money at all at one point to work on it, and thinking, well, how on earth am I going to finish it and do what needs to be done with no money at all?
Hmm.
Well, something will happen, I guess. I'll just start work. And I just started working on it, and then someone would send me a donation, or, I'd get an email from someone and say, "What can I do to help?" I mean, it was just amazing. And I think that, as Charles points out in these chapters, that sort of really, really believing in something and putting your whole self into it, without any sort of real expectation other than I'm just going to keep doing this until I either fall on my face or I get to the other end of it, and just trusting,
Yeah.
amazing things start to happen.
It's interesting how much that is like the way a child plays when
Hmm.
they're playing in a truly childlike way and not just imitating adult style of play. But this idea that you have an inspiration, you follow it, you don't I mean, as a child, a young child, they are literally naive, because they've never been exposed to the impossibility, the thought that something is impossible.
Right,
So if they want to build a castle, they can, in their minds, yeah, I can build a castle, and
right.
and they just go to it. And it's not until the world starts to beat it out of people and just to dismiss, oh, that's just childlike, or that's just uh, silly make believe, or whatever. And we lose the power of naivete. I guess I wouldn't
Definitely.
even want to call it naivete if you can manage to hang on to the essence of it into adulthood. It's something beyond naivete, because naivete implies that you just sort of don't know, that you're ignorant of the
Mm,
impossibility of something. But what we're talking about in this book is knowing that most people believe something is impossible and believing that it's possible anyway, and not pulling the wool over your eyes, not deluding yourself that if I
right.
just say affirmations, money will fall from the ceiling, you know, or
Yeah, that
but
doesn't work because I've tried it.
but at the same time, um, trusting that we live in a world, in a universe of possibilities and infinite possibilities, and who are we to to decide what is and isn't possible when the one thing that's impossible is to know everything that's possible. So anyway, yeah, I think there is
Yeah,
a kind of a way that you can uh, realize that the essence of naivete is something that it's actually the opposite. It contains its own opposite. You're not if you're knowingly naive, then it's the opposite of naivete. It's more like um, the the power of receptivity to inspiration.
hmm.
I'm just forming these thoughts as we go here.
Yeah. No, I'm still wrapping my head around what you just said. So that's your reality right now, right?
Yes. Are we moving on? Let's
This chap,
let's
yeah,
introduce
this
chapter 13, reality, with a
reality.
poem.
This is you have a poem for that one, right?
I have a poem from Brooke.
Yeah.
She wrote, "Call us all dreamers. Synchronicities occur in beautiful ways."
Wow, that's great. I
Hmm.
really like that. And I this chapter really I struggled really hard with this chapter because amazingly in 4 pages, Charles just kind of managed to completely blow my mind. I mean, and so he says the line I wrote down that really struck me here was, we cannot change a belief through an act of will because a state of belief is a state of being. And I started to really think about, well, that sort of begs the question then, is our reality created by what we believe, or do we create our reality based on, or the beliefs come out of our experience of reality? It's like the chicken or the egg thing.
Hmm.
So, and so tying right back into the sort of naivete, and getting out of our way and letting the process naturally sort of unfold creates a certain kind of reality, and then we believe in that reality and we believe it's possible, and suddenly it's possible, and then you've done it. So it's a funny thing. It's like this whole idea of, well, what's reality? And then, my experience of reality is different from your experience of reality, or is it?
Well, I think it is. I think that's actually the whole point of existence in this world of interbeing. In other words, we're all part of the same universe of consciousness, but each of us is a different portal, a different viewpoint. So we're all looking at it from a different angle, and because of the various ways that we as individuals form, we all experience a slightly different universe, or in some cases, a radically different universe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's really obvious in certain ways. Children see things differently than adults. Men see things differently than women. A blind person experiences the world in a very different way from a seeing person, and a
Mm-hmm.
deaf person, yeah, even the same thing. Um, so we take in the world through our senses, our physical senses and our non-physical senses, like intuition, and and then it's run through the filter of our selfhood, and through that we each create a very different world.
Right, right.
I don't even think you need any kind of metaphysical explanation to accept that we all do create our own reality, as that, the New Age aphorism, you create your own reality. I think
Right.
that's true, if anything, just because we all have different beliefs and different perceptions, and different ways of interpreting the world. So,
And I think also, but it's like your thoughts literally create your reality. Your beliefs, and maybe thoughts is another term for beliefs. The way you think about things creates the reality that you experience. So if you begin to change your way of thinking, your belief system, then your reality begins to change too. But
right.
one thing I particularly loved in this chapter was, he says, it's not ours to decide what is true or possible. Some teachings ask us to start by creating a vision. And Charles has a little bit of a problem with that. He says the proper way to start is to receive a vision.
Right.
And he calls it the vision of that which wants to be born. Not having invented it ourselves, we sense that it has a beingness of its own. Now that was just amazing revelation to me. This idea that, when you receive a vision, there's something so fundamentally different than trying to create a vision. Because if we're really stuck in the old story, then the vision that we may be creating is stuck in the old story. We may not have all the pieces available to get beyond that. But if you receive a vision, it's a whole different set of dynamics, it seems, right? Because it's created outside of our own perceptions in a way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know. This is a really deep thought. This kind of really blew me away. This idea that
there's an image that comes to mind with this idea of something wanting to be born. And the image for me is the image of when you see like a parking lot, and there's a crack in it, and a dandelion is growing out of the crack.
right.
It's like life wants to come through, and it just looks for a place where it can.
Right.
And it'll take whatever's available. Life is not picky in that way.
Right.
And I think the same thing, you could see that as analogous to the sort of the universe of possibility, and all these possibilities want to be born, and they're just looking for places where they can. And
Hmm.
if it is in a particular person who, because of their life experience, their background, their beliefs, their particular strengths and weaknesses, a through them a particular creation can emerge.
Right. But you got to be open to that, though.
Right.
'Cause if you're closed down, then life's not going to choose, that
Yeah. But I
that
think
port.
that, I mean, that's like the question of the day, if not
Yeah.
the life, what wants to be born through me?
Right.
Um, because I mean, there's a lot of things that want to be born. There's a lot of things that want to come into being, and things like, um, a kinder world, or a better economic system, or uh, uh, any number of things that we've been talking about, some of these issues that people care about. And they will be born, they'll find a way. But the question for me is, what am what am I here to give birth to? What
Right.
wants to be born that can be born through me because of who I am?
Hmm.
I think that's a fascinating question, and it can really help you. It can help reduce the overwhelm, the sense that all these things need to change, all these things need to happen, but I can't do it all. But you're
Right.
not supposed to. You're not supposed to do it all. You're supposed to find that one crack in your pavement where the dandelion can come through.
That's a great analogy. I like that.
Yeah.
Be the crack in the pavement where the dandelion wants to come through. There should be a t-shirt that says that. That's great.
Maybe that's my crack, to
Yeah.
be a t-shirt maker.
I'm the crack in the pavement where the dandelion will come through.
I'm a crack addict.
It's
I just
great.
want to keep cracking up
No,
and letting more dandelions through.
I do really like that image. I mean, I've always marveled at that too, that you can asphalt over a whole area, and then within it, if no one is there taking care of the asphalt, the weeds will find a way through and just bust up right out of it. And I'm like, how is that possible? How do they find their way through that? But
Right.
they do, and that's kind of amazing.
We
But
should
yes,
think of our we should think of our dreams and our inspirations as weeds, and to
yeah.
sort of to elevate the concept of a weed to a new place of nobility.
Well, doesn't Charles talk about it in terms of seeds, like planting little seeds that eventually sprout?
Yes, although I think he was talking about something much grander.
Yeah.
We'll get to that that's in the last chapter.
Yeah. So let's see. Where are we? We've done a little reality check.
There's a thing about reality. In this chapter, he talks about the law of attraction. And it really
Right.
spoke to me because I kind of went through a deal with the law of attraction when it became very popular around 2004. Um,
Hmm.
I had always been exposed to that kind of thinking because my parents were into the New Age kind of stuff. Um, but it really kind of hit a stride around that time. And I had just gone through one of the worst years in my life. And so taking in this, uh, uh, I read the book Ask and It Is Given by Abraham Hicks, and it really just brought back a sense of hope, and um, and for whatever reason I was able to read it in kind of the way that Charles is talking about here, which is um, to to kind of straddle both worlds, and to look at it as, and to not just sort of reduce it to some sort of magic,
Hmm.
but to see it
Right.
as something inherent in the universe, and to think outside the box of science. But I all of the revelations that I had kind of made sense scientifically or psychologically anyway, and I started to integrate it with my work as a parenting coach, and I realized that this idea of attraction was uh, was a really powerful force in biology. You know that certainly if you're going to have an attachment with your child, a healthy attachment, well, what keeps you together? There's some force of attraction that has to keep people together or bring people together in order to, in order for there to be the kind of psychological closeness and bonding and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started sort of morphing those together, and I eventually decided to call my philosophy of parenting attraction parenting. And I thought, well, that's cool because everyone's sort of getting into the law of attraction, and it's kind of, there's this crossover here. And then The Secret came out, and and The Secret, I felt, was kind of, it took and sort of cheapened this philosophy and made it kind of all about just getting the money you want, or getting the beautiful women, or cars, or whatever, you know. And I know that wasn't the only way to interpret it, but certainly a lot of people did, and found it to be kind of pathetic, or they were very critical, especially the people that are critical of the New Age were really upset by the popularity of that movie. Anyway, and that's when I got kind of stuck in my work, because I wanted to bring some of these expansive ideas into my work as a parenting coach. But then the idea of the law of attraction was getting all this bad press, and I eventually abandoned it. But I still feel that there's some really important truth in that whole in that whole phenomenon of the law of attraction. And I think depending on how you interpret it, it either is really powerful or really stupid. And but I loved how in this chapter, at the beginning of the chapter, he really talks about why it doesn't work for people. Right. And it was what you were saying before, that people are trying to, you know, to make things happen, or to just generate a vision.
So will them.
And usually the vision that you try to make happen is going to be based on something that's not particularly authentic. So that which is authentic is what comes to you in a moment of inspiration, not when you're thinking about, you know, what should I want? What does society tell me I should want?
Right.
So I'm just gonna read this and then we can move on, because he talks about why the law of attraction doesn't work. 1, fake beliefs, and 2, the vision isn't received. And I wrote in my notes, it's not your heart's desire. It may be just sort of, you know, what you think you're supposed to want. And his 3-step plan to make the law of attraction work is, step 1, you got to receive a vision that feels true. Right. So we get ideas all the time, but if it doesn't feel true really deeply in your heart, then it's probably one of these externally injected ideas that came from culture, that came from the old story in some way. Step 2, heal the wounds and doubts that the vision illuminates. So when you take on this vision, it immediately brings up doubts, which point to various wounds that we talked about in earlier chapters, the kind of wounds that lead to cynicism. Right. So you heal that, and then you move into step 3, bow into service to that which wants to be born. So you're orienting toward giving, not taking. I think that's a huge difference when you look at the sort of the oversimplified law of attraction literature that's out there. It's all about what's in it for me, not what do I get to give to the world. Right.
And I just want to add one thing to that. He says, you know, when you said they're bowing into service to that which needs to be born, he said, the deeper our service to that which wants to be born, the more it is able to arrange the synchronistic encounters and fortuitous events that allow us to accomplish that which lies beyond our understanding of cause and effect.
Yeah, which is essentially law of attraction.
Right.
In the best sense of it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So, and he writes here, a leader is the holder of a story someone whose experience of its reality is deep enough so that she can hold the belief on behalf of others. I thought that was interesting in terms of leadership, um, because it's something that I think people who are watching this are probably leaders. Even if you, dear viewer, don't think you're a leader, you must be, because you wouldn't be watching this. You wouldn't be uh, interested in how do I lead the way to a more beautiful world, if you weren't at some level a leader. Just pointing that out. I think leadership is we have stereotypes of leadership, you know, and we think of it as more in terms of the person in control, the person in charge, you know. But what if all you're doing is holding a story, holding a vision, and you might be a very quiet leader. You might be you might be the kind of leader that no one really even knows that you are leading the way somehow. So I like to keep that in mind, especially in light of this idea that it doesn't have to be big or make a big impact in a visible way in order to change the world, whatever it is that you do.
Right. And in fact, sometimes it is the more invisible and the smaller things that are more effective. So let's see.
Anything else you want to say about this chapter?
No, I don't think so.
I have one other thing I took a note of. This is a little tangential, but where Charles writes, for the visionary, that knowledge is in the beginning a lonely knowledge, surrounded by a welter of doubt both within and without. And the word lonely sort of popped out at me, and it kind of felt like he was being vulnerable with me to kind of say that he experiences a kind of loneliness that I certainly do. And I think anyone who is going into these deep conversations with themselves and with others are finding there's not a lot of people waiting to have that conversation.
Right, right.
And as Abraham Hicks always said, there's never a crowd on the leading edge, you know. And I think that's just something good to acknowledge. And I appreciate Charles for alluding to it, that there is a kind of loneliness that we have to accept as a part of this journey, because when you're in the front, when you're leading the way, you can't see anyone in front of you. You're just
right.
Yes, you're hoping that people are following along and taking your side.
Right. Yeah, and I totally can relate to that too. I feel that too. Sort of staring into the unknown sometimes and wondering where everybody is. Am I the only one here?
I have to say, I felt that way when I met you, and why after you interviewed me for your film, I was determined that I was going to have a relationship with you, that we were going to be friends, because it's hard to find friends that get where you're coming from.
Oh,
you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I would just encourage everyone, when you meet someone, and you feel that there's a sense that this is the person who kind of gets where I'm coming from. This is the person who is not going to think I'm crazy, and you can give me the knowing nods when I say these things that make other people kind of go like that, and that, you know, you really need to seize those opportunities, to not let them pass by, and say, you know what, this is a little weird, but will you be my friend?
Will you be my friend? I'm the crack in the pavement where the dandelions come through.
Somebody said something about being into crack. I don't know. It's like,
no, it's an important point. It's true. I think we need to definitely band together, and I hope that Charles's book here is making an impact and reaching the right people and helping them to connect with each other and form a community and tribe. I mean, it's interesting. There's so many things going on in this country right now that I feel like are so divisive and separating people and pushing people into corners and in a funny kind of way, the flip side of that is that maybe people will start finding community again, and finding people that resonate with them, and coming back to sort of the original idea of what community was, helping each other out and taking care of each other, and not depending so much on this big authority of the government, telling us what we should do with our children, what we should do with our health, what we should do with our free time and work and everything else, and all these restrictions that seem to be coming at us left and right. Push all that aside and go out and find friends and find community and find people that resonate with you, and we can do it together. You don't need all of that, And so it's an interesting time. I feel a lot of pull in myself and with my family to find that community too.
Which is exactly why we're going to Rethinking Everything, because it is a magnet for people on the leading edge of these kinds of things.
Right. And that's huge. That's really huge because, then you don't have to be standing at that front alone.
It is nice. I'm going to read
come and join us at Rethinking Everything.
So, and I'll be your friend.
Yeah, and you can be our friends. What haven't we covered here? So we need to talk a little bit about orthodoxy. Orthodoxy. Let's see. Well, so I wrote down something here. And I'm not even sure why I wrote this down, but I'm going to read it anyway. So it's funny, it's inevitable that when you start to question and unravel one entanglement in your life, that the whole ball of string starts to come on. You know what I mean? The whole thing starts to unravel.
Yeah.
And that's certainly true for me, and in my own personal experience, I start to look at, well, how are we going to educate our daughter? And let's really start to question and look at that. And then that led to, well, then why am I working full time punching a clock when I'm sort of trying to instill this sense of freedom in her? So then the whole work thing starts to come into question.
Yeah.
And then the whole idea of making a living comes into question. And then suddenly the whole ball of string is unraveled and you're trying to make sense of it all. So I kind of wrote that down because I was struck by that sort of notion in this idea.
Well, and also I think that you're more of a holistic thinker. And I think one of the things that Charles points out is that people aren't, they're conditioned to think in a unintegrated way.
Right.
So that they will make a change in one area and not see that it applies to another area. So the example I think he gives, the example of, they'll not see the connections between how we think about the medical system,
right,
and the school system, and the food system, and all these different systems that a person decides to be a vegetarian, and that's because they don't want to kill animals, but they maybe politically they don't see how there's certain political choices are affecting people's lives in a more horrific way than even killing animals. So
right. It's a funny thing. And one thing that struck me is that there's a sort of it's kind of a little perverse, but there's an interconnectedness within the old story between all of these bureaucracies and institutions. So that you start questioning one, and then you realize, well, that's sort of affected also by another institution, like you just pointed out. Banking is affecting schooling, which is affecting medical institutions, which is affecting legal and insurance, and they're all kind of interconnected. And if you start unraveling one, then you inevitably have to start unraveling all of them. Otherwise, you're really in a sort of hypocritical state.
Yeah, and I just want to say this to people listening, is that when you start to make the connections, it can get very overwhelming.
Yeah.
And almost like you feel like, well, I can't do it all, so I'm not going to do any of it. You might even just sort of give up. And for me, to avoid that outcome, what I've had to do is just sort of decide where I draw the line. It's like there's certain things I don't participate in. I don't participate in the medical system. I don't participate in the educational system. I don't participate in the corporate employment system. There's a lot of things that I've exited from, but I still live in suburbia. Or I still I don't grow my own food, or there's a lot of things that if I said, well, if the other things are only valid if I do everything, then I would end up doing nothing.
Yeah,
and
you can
so
get
I kind of have to pick the things that, again, it's like finding where is that crack in your pavement. It's like,
right.
So for some people, it's I'm going to be a homeschooler, and not participate in the dysfunctional schooling system, and that's where the crack is in their pavement. Maybe it's not in the monetary or the economic model. Maybe they need to participate in conventional economics in order for the other changes they're making to work.
Right. And there's a time and a place for everything, meaning that, you can make little steps and change one thing and unravel one piece of string and keep the other ball in place. And then maybe a time will arise when you realize, okay, now I have the ability or the understanding to unravel the next piece. You don't have to do it all at once. Life is a process. It's always changing. It's always evolving and morphing. So it's not possible to unravel all of it. We'd go insane if we unraveled all of it at once.
Right.
There'd be nothing left to stand on. It'd be like the Zen master that just pulls the rug out and you just fall on your face. Like there's no ground, there's nothing. so
I think that sort of that
can't handle that.
That being driven insane is kind of one of the reasons why Charles says that we can react with hostility to some of these realizations that if this, therefore that, and someone puts it in your face. Well, you don't want to subject your child to school, but you're willing to subject yourself to this corporate prison, and
right.
and then, but if that is overwhelming, then you might react to it with hostility,
right?
Because it's like, don't mess with my security, right? And to the extent that we've built our sense of security on some of these institutions, we do tend to feel hostile toward anyone who suggests that those institutions should be questioned and perhaps even abandoned.
Right. I like coming back to poets for this particular round. We have Bob here wrote a little piece about orthodoxy. She says, "Whether I know it or not, the whole world revolves around who am I." It's kind of like that. Who am I? And that question is a really big one, and it's always changing too. It's huge, and I think we always need to be looking at that. And then, that comes right back into what's our reality right now. Our reality is who am I right now?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that it makes me stand still in my tracks. I'm like, I can just contemplate that all day.
And also, and anytime you ask the question, it's different too.
Mm.
Every time, that's a good meditation practice, is to sit down and ask, instead of following your breath or counting your breath or doing some other thing, just ask yourself the question, who am I? Who is this sitting here?
I had a conversation that speaks to this, a conversation with my partner, Beth, the other day. And what brought up this idea was we were talking about whether you like someone or not, and how with some people you just click, and there's a kind of a hell yes that you feel, yes, I can be in relationship with this person. And other people, you just don't feel it. Maybe you have certain things that aren't in common. Maybe you're just on a different wavelength. But then I thought, well, what about that in terms of this concept of interbeing? Because from the point of view of interbeing, we're all one, right? So, and each person is a different aspect of this oneness. So if I say I like you, but I don't like you, it's like I'm saying, uh, I like one part of myself, but I don't like another part of myself. It's
Right.
all, it's all me, and it's all you. I mean, it's all the interbeing. You know, I like, and I like this idea that the interbeing, instead of talking about interbeing as as a sort of a general topic, interbeing is the interbeing. Like the universe itself is the interbeing.
Hmm.
And that kind of just set off a whole spiral of interesting ideas. Well, if the universe is the interbeing and I am uh, merely one aspect of it or one viewpoint of it, one portal of it looking in on itself and on its other angles, what does that mean in terms of whether I like someone or I don't like someone?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I try to look at that as, at least when I'm paying attention and want to look at it, is what about this person am I rejecting that what is it about them that is actually um, an aspect of myself that I'm not willing to accept? Because I think everyone is a mirror to everyone else.
Right. And
There's this idea that, like you said, the interbeing, I kind of like to look at it as a multifaceted jewel,
mm,
right? And you can turn and look at all these different sides and all these different facets, but it's still the same jewel.
yeah,
So, you're looking at this and going, oh, this is shiny. I like this part, but this one's kind of dull. So, but it's still the same jewel.
yeah, exactly.
So, so, when you're interacting with people too, and if you look at them as mirrors, what about them are they mirroring to you right now that you need to take in or accept or learn from? So, but we have our preferences too, and it's hard to be completely free from picking and choosing. We all pick and choose, but to be really free, we have to be free from picking and choosing, and that's a really hard place to be.
Right. And I did not conclude from that line of thought that therefore I should just not make any distinctions between people or who I make my
Right.
friend and who I don't. But rather that, I mean, it leads to a different way of deciding how you relate with other people and the world in general. And it's because you're not saying I like that, I hate that, I like that, I hate that. You're not dividing things in terms of good and bad or like and dislike. Um, it's just more like following your inspiration. I feel inspired, and this other thing that doesn't inspire me, I don't I don't love it any less. Like my heart can be open to the whole world and every person in the world, and I don't have to not love someone to nevertheless choose to go in a different direction, to choose to go toward someone where there is that inspiration. Um, so in a way, it's the same thing, but in a way, it's a very different thing because
Hmm.
I don't have to judge someone as less deserving of my friendship in order to not be their friend. Everyone is just as deserving as love as anyone else, and my expressions of love are going to go in the direction where my inspiration leads it, rather than just because I've made a judgment about someone that's either positive or negative.
Right. And going in the direction that your inspiration leads it in that moment, because in a different moment it might lead you somewhere differently.
Right.
And that's interesting too, is that we have this notion that these sort of fixed ideas, that if you have, like you said, if there's something, you meet someone and there's something about them that just doesn't, like, whoa, no, that's not my person at all. Well, only in that moment, right?
Yeah.
What if I met them in a week, in a different set of circumstances, in a different situation? Would I have the same reaction?
Right.
And that's an interesting thing to think about too. I was in a workshop once that was really interesting, because we unconsciously make these choices about who we're going to sort of work with or team up with or partner with in a workshop situation, often based on that initial kind of vibe that you get, or even their appearance, or just something about them energetically, and that kind of affects our experience, and in some ways weakens our experience because we tend to be drawn to a certain thing or a certain type of person, and then not to everyone else, and so we're perhaps robbing ourselves of a more rich experience by not interacting with others. So in this particular workshop, I thought this was quite brilliant. Normally they would say, okay, pick someone in the room to partner with, and we're going to do an exercise or whatever, whatever. And you would look around the room and quick navigate to someone that seems to have some kind of resonance with you, right? What they did in this one is they said, everybody put on a blindfold, and I want you to crawl around the room on all fours like animals and make animal noises. Pigs, dogs, cats, anything, elephants, just make noises and move around the room and bump into people and just collide with people. And when we say stop, whoever you are currently collided with is going to be your partner. And this was so incredibly mind-blowing because, we're all going, first of all, just to break down the barriers of having to sort of crawl around and make animal noises and be crazy was fun and freeing. And then you're bumping into everybody, and then the workshop leader said, okay, now take off the blindfold. Whoever you're in contact with, that's the partner you're going to be working with. And for me personally, the person I was working with, there was absolutely no way I would have chosen them had I just been told to pick a partner in the room. And as it turned out, we just had a really interesting experience together, working together and partnering up in what we were doing. So, and I just thought that was brilliant, to completely break down all of the normal ways that we kind of pick and choose.
But it's interesting to me also that there was a context given for coming together, which was these animal noises.
Yeah.
Like, do you remember the animal noise that this person made?
No, I don't. Because I think people were just changing them, It was just a sort of random, just make noise and move around and. So I was being a pig, and then I was a dog, and I was, just trying out different sounds and just seeing energetically what that did. So, yeah, I thought it was fun anyway.
That's great.
Went off on a little tangent there, but anyway.
No, it's a great tangent, and maybe we'll do that when we do some of our workshops at Rethinking Everything. We'll have to find an excuse to do that exercise because it sounds very fun.
Yeah, it is interesting. Let's see, where are we? We got.
Let's go to newness. I'm gonna read. I'm gonna read a haiku from Brooke. No. I'm gonna read Barb's haiku, and Brooke. All of these haikus are going to be posted on the website, so you can find them there. Barb writes about newness. My heart comes alive as I return to the bold desire within. That's better than what we normally think of new and improved, this kind of newness that Charles talks about. But rather just your heart coming alive.
Yeah.
When I read that, it actually made me think of you and something you said in an earlier video about desire. Do you remember that?
I don't remember what I said.
Well, we'll have to get to it later, but yeah, I feel like desire is an interesting topic. I don't remember if is there a chapter on desire?
Yeah, there is, and I think I remember vaguely what I said. Something about that we often fear our deepest desires.
Oh, right.
So, our deepest desire often is the thing driving us, and yet somehow we're fearful of it because it might not work out the way we want it to. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you, Barb, for that. And did you have any thoughts about this chapter?
Surprisingly, I kind of didn't. I felt, in a way, the chapter felt like a little bit of a summary of the previous chapters to me, the way it was set out here in the book.
It actually,
I did like the little story about the 3 seeds. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yes.
We might touch on that a little bit.
So I'll summarize the story really quick.
Yeah.
The 3 seeds is this idea that before we entered the story of separation, some wise people planted these seeds that would help us lift ourselves out of the story at some point in case we get stuck in it. And so one of them was the wisdom lineages, which is often in the spiritual traditions or shamanic traditions. Then there's the second seed was sacred stories, myths, legends, and fairy tales that have this certain energy that contains this seed, of reminding us of something primal and deeply ingrained in our humanity. And the third is indigenous tribes. And that one, of course, spoke to me in a big way because I got into the stuff that I do through the book, The Continuum Concept, which I mentioned earlier in an earlier video. And I was just remembering how the second time I met you was when I drove down to San Francisco to collect the belongings of Jean Liedloff, the author of The Continuum Concept, because she had I had worked with her, and she had given me some of her stuff in her will, and so I still have them looking right now over there on the other side of this room. Some artifacts taken from the jungle, from these indigenous people that she lived with, and for a time they were. I stored them for a night in your garage.
I remember that.
And then you helped me pack up and get home, but and you gave me your hospitality. That was part of my bold intention to become friends with you, is I'm just going to ask you for hospitality, and so far it seems to have worked. Anyway, but the wisdom of indigenous tribes is something that carries one of these seeds that can remind us of our original state of interbeing, our kind of original naive interbeing. I feel like separation was the journey out of a kind of naivete of not knowing how much separateness is possible to experience. And now that we know it, we're ready to re-embrace the kind of interconnectedness that was taken for granted by our ancient ancestors, whose cultures still live in indigenous peoples. Barely, what few are left. But so that's a big deal to me, and I think he put it in there under the chapter heading of newness because partly I think he wants to say this is nothing new.
Right.
This is not a new shiny philosophy of the week. For he's not trying to write a best-selling book that'll and go on Oprah and whatever that thing that people do when they're trying to change the world in the conventional way. This is not really anything new at all. It's very old, and it's the blossoming of these seeds that have been planted long time ago.
Yeah, it is. It's like reclaiming something that we've forgotten, and yet that we have a longing for. I think we all have a deep. If we're really honest, we all have a really deep longing to reconnect to that which has been lost or hidden for so long. Mm-hmm. And whether it's that connection to indigenous tribes, or that sort of seed of knowledge that we had when we were children, perhaps when we were first brought into the beingness, Mm. And it gets gradually covered over. I think we're all trying to get back to that at some level.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've covered this. This is our longest recording yet. Yeah. But this was a really thick. There was a lot here. It was hard even to narrow it down as much as we did. Yeah. I think, and I think we're kind of getting over the hump. We're midway through the book nearly, and and it's going to start to move forward more, um, I think in a less challenging way.
Yeah,
Um,
especially looking at the chapter titles that are coming up next. Here's what we have coming up for next time. We have urgency. So we're just going to rush really fast through that one. Scarcity. Well, there's barely anything there. Doing. Well, we'll do some stuff around that. And then there's non-doing. So we won't have to do anything at all for that one. And then attention. So maybe we'll just pay attention at the very end on the next episode.
was that
Next
six?
episode,
Are we doing 5 or 6 next week?
I think six. Well, we're doing six, right? One, two, three, four, five. That's no, that's five. Oh, then there's another one. Struggle. Oh well. So all of that is going to be a big struggle. So, so
It's going to be a struggle for me not to do anything
yeah,
because I
non-doing.
get fidgety.
That's going to be my favorite one. Non-doing. I like that. So anyway, that's what we have to look forward to for next time. I think it's going to be very exciting. And
Good. And I'd like to remind everyone out there that we want your input. We want your stories. We want your poems. We want you to tell us anything that feels inspired as a result of reading these chapters. And we
yeah,
will, if we can't mention them in the videos, then we'll post them somewhere else, or we'll figure out a way to make it a part of this conversation. So it's not just me and Jeremy gabbing for an hour and a half.
although it's such a pleasure, Scott.
It is. It is. If there was anyone I had to choose to gab with, it would be you.
Well, thank you. So on that note, I guess we'll have to save the rest of our gabbing until next time.
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Good to see you again.
You too.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.